Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our panel on balance of power in the US-Russia-China relations. In the last couple of decades, we have been talking about transformation of international system. And in the last, actually, few years, we started to talk return of great power rivalry in international system. And the transformation itself and its uncertainties and unpredictabilities is generated, increase with the increasing power tension and different types of power competition between United States and China initially. There has been discussions about what kind of conflict China and United States may have in the future. There were theories about a cyber war, there were theories about hybrid warfare, but everybody was sure that there would be an unconventional competition, but they were discussing the nature of it. With the Trump administration in the United States, we started to see that the real competition will be mostly on economic terms. And the trade war concept started to be raised as the new, kind of new concept to describe the superpower rivalry. And in the last couple of years now, especially after the war in Ukraine, we started to talk again about the return of geopolitics. We know that this is a debate and this is a process in transition, but instead of superpower rivalry between United States and China, which has been a evergreen topic of all of the security forums in different parts of the world, we decided to have a trilateral power rivalry, and what will be the implications of it for the international system and world politics. Because of that, we have today 4 distinguished panelists from Turkey and from South Korea. So instead of people from United States, Europe, China, and Russia, outside observers are discussing the potential implication of this great power rivalry. And on my left, it is Professor Jung from Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, Professor Chong-Jin from Hankuk University of Foreign Studies again, Professor Oktav, Istanbul Medeniyet University, and Professor Akıllı, Kırşehir Evran University. I'll give a few minutes for each panelist for its introductory remarks, and then we will continue our discussion in question and answer. Please, floor is yours, Professor.
Dear Mr. Moderator, I'm grateful for your kind introduction, and I would like to express my appreciation for the exceptional presentations of the previous panels. To everyone present, including my essential colleagues and the honorable guests, my name is Giwoong, and I represent Hankuk University of Foreign Studies as the vice head of HK Plus National Strategies Research Project Agency for the National Research Foundation of Korea. It is my honor to be here. Well, I want to express my appreciation for the organizing committee to their hard work in putting together this excellent forum, and I'm privileged to be here and exchange ideas with distinguished scholars and experts from different various countries. My presentation will begin by acknowledging, as Mr. Moderator pointed out, the return of the era of geopolitics. Geopolitical thinking refers to the interaction between geographic space and political power. We have witnessed the devastating outcomes of past geopolitical policies, particularly in the form of the 2 world wars. These wars were a result of broken power balances caused by geopolitical thinking. Despite our efforts to prevent the recurrence of such conflicts, our attempts have not been so successful. Unfortunately, the strategic competition among the big 3, the United States, Russia, and China, has revived the ghost of geopolitics from the early 20th century and the Cold War. Well, Ernst B. Haas offered multiple interpretations of the balance of power, including power distribution, equilibrium, hegemony, stability and peace, instability and war, power politics, a universal law of history, and a system for guiding policymaking. 8 different verbal meanings were used to point out the balance of power. Therefore, maintaining the status quo and altering power distribution can be considered a balance of power simultaneously. Throughout the last century and even into this one, we have seen many conflicts arise due to the practice of a balance of power. Unfortunately, these conflicts have never resulted in positive outcomes, as we all know, causing only grief and anguish. The ongoing crisis in Ukraine serves as a current example of a broken balance of power. The ongoing competition between the United States and China, along with Russia's aggressive attitude towards neighboring countries, formerly part of the Soviet Union, and the conflict experienced by the allies due to their influence, pose a significant challenge. We are concerned about potential power shifts and disputes arising from these movements. How can we effectively address these issues? As a scholar from Korea, a divided country, I should recall the memory of the past. The 3 years Korean War devastated our motherland and left a big scar on the Korean Peninsula and Korean people. We, Koreans, have experienced the fight of the same nation and people and the killing of brothers by brothers. Fortunately, with the help of the global society, we survived. And that nation, which survived scarcely, now becomes the 10th global economy. If not for the support from the global citizens, Korea's glory of today is not possible. I live in a country separated for 70 years with an armistice agreement in effect. The Korean War never had a formal conclusion, which means there is always the potential for renewed conflict. My country's current struggles and division result from geopolitical tensions and unequal power dynamics. I would like to take a moment to honor and remember the sacrifice and contribution made by our Turkish brothers and sisters during the Korean War. Despite not knowing the country or its people, Turkish sons and daughters voluntarily gave their lives to defend it. The gratitude we feel toward Turkey cannot be expressed enough. We Koreans will never forget and cherish the precious sacrifice made by Turkey. Even if Turkey were to say that we have thanked them enough, we would never stop expressing our gratitude. Thank you again. Since the signing of the Armistice Agreement in 1953, Korea has been operating under the Armistice system for more than 70 years. However, despite the people's longing for unification, it has yet to be achieved. The power struggle surrounding the Korean Peninsula remains turbulent and unresolved. The confrontation between the Southern Triangle, comprising the United States, Japan, and Korea, and the Northern Triangle, consisting of Russia, China, and DPRK, North Korea, persists, leading to a precarious power balance in Northeast Asia. We must promptly address the ongoing conflicts in the Taiwan Straits, as they could escalate into severe conflicts in Northeast Asia. The most likely scenario is a dispute between China and Taiwan, with the possibility of a provocation from North Korea. This could result in a military confrontation between the Northern and Southern Triangles, potentially leading to a global war. We must make immediate and decisive action to prevent such catastrophic events, but unfortunately, the current generation of the Korean people were born with the nuclear threats, so as a kind of security fatigue, they are not quite sensitive to the threat that they are facing now. As a theorist of international relations, I am concerned about the potential for another significant war. Despite experiencing an unusual period of peace since the end of the Second World War, the increasingly hostile and self-centered behavior of powerful nations suggests that another significant conflict may be inevitable. The Korean people strongly oppose any use of force to alter the current situation in Northeast Asia, particularly concerning Taiwan. President Yoon of Korea has also voiced his opposition to such attempts, and we stand in solidarity with my president. Regarding power contribution in the world, Turkey's motto, "The world is bigger than five," seems fitting. However, given the current state of affairs, I would rephrase it as "the world is bigger than two." This can be interpreted in two different ways. When we refer to the first two, we are talking about the world being divided into powerful and vulnerable countries. This structure is reminiscent of the world during the Cold War, where we had two distinct groups, strong and weak countries. Following the end of the Cold War, a group of middle countries emerged on the international stage. This concept allowed non-powerful but not weak nations to counter the unilateral actions of stronger governments in shaping the global order. Two examples of middle countries are Korea and Turkey. Their efforts to gain international recognition led to the formation of MICTA, which includes Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey, and Australia. The second two refers to the ongoing rivalry between the United States and China, two major world powers known as the G2, who see themselves as the ones shaping the rules of the global community. The G2 strives for dominance in the global society and tries to persuade other nations to align with them, a situation that is not favored by many. In light of global turbulence, we need to consider how we can avoid unilateral changes enforced by force. The solution lies in focusing on the absolute gains achieved through cooperation. Instead of comparing our gains to others, which leads to conflict, we can work together to achieve mutual benefits. While scarcity is a reality, we can still avoid conflict through cooperation, even in an anarchic environment, as liberal institutionalists suggest. They place faith in international institutions and multilateralism to achieve this goal. Multilateral cooperation is essential, but the challenge is that everyone has a different interpretation of what multilateralism means. When the US talks about multilateralism, it refers to collaboration with the countries that share US values and intentions. This creates a close league where US values dominate. However, China's definition of multilateralism is a loose coalition of tolerant countries that don't necessarily follow strict rules as long as China is one of the members. If China becomes the group leader, it will pressure other nations to follow its lead, which is not welcomed by the international community, and we experienced it. How can we address this issue and increase global cooperation? How can smaller countries have a say in the global decision-making process? These are essential questions that need to be answered. In order to find a solution, we must come together with key players from middle countries in the global community who had the same universal values as the rest of the world. Although value is subjective, there are specific universal values that most members of the global society can agree on. These include respecting human rights, caring for the weak, aiding those who are in danger, and upholding the rule of law. Another significant value to consider is opposition to unilateral changes of the status quo by force. By focusing on these universal values, we can establish a foundation for cooperation and effectively tackle the problems we face as a global society. Culture plays a significant role in society and is often called soft power. Some people believe that cultural influence can increase a country's soft power. However, it's important to note that sending culture without considering its impact can lead to unexpected negative consequences. To leverage culture's power as a catalyst for global cooperation, we must handle it carefully, remembering that we are all part of a larger global civilization is essential. By identifying the contact points of different cultures and fostering mutual understanding, we can expand our connections as members of a global society. I propose that Turkey and Korea collaborate to address global issues. Our two countries share many similarities as middle countries with strong economies, passionate people, and significant geopolitical influence. Together, we can act as mediators in our region and drive our future towards greater cooperation, maximizing absolute gains rather than settling for relative gains. Scholars such as Henry Kissinger, Yves Lacoste, and Zbigniew Brzezinski emphasized the significance of geopolitics. Brzezinski, for example, identified Ukraine, Azerbaijan, South Korea, Turkey, and Iran as crucial geopolitical pivots in his book, The Great Chessboard. Whether or not you agree with these scholars, their insights are worth considering. While I want to be evaluating their perspectives on the matter, it's evidence that they have given us much to ponder. Ukraine is engaged in a battle with Russia to maintain its sovereignty and independence. In the interest of promoting a positive future for humanity, Korea and Turkey can collaborate. I believe Turkey has already successfully carried out its role as a key regional power. During a recent summit with US President Joe Biden, Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol referenced a poem by Irish poet Seamus Heaney. The verse states that admirable behavior is the key to gaining power and influence among people globally. Therefore, we must conduct ourselves in a way that others can admire. This behavior will enable us to control our destiny and achieve peace and prosperity. Together, Korea and Turkey have the power to overcome any challenges with our unbreakable unity. By working together and focusing on our shared values and cultural exchanges, we can become a driving force for peace and prosperity in two regions currently filled with tensions and conflict. We must reject the ideas of Lebensbaum, once favored by Nazis, and unilateral changes of status quo by force, and move forward together. Let's go together. In Korean language, 같이 갑시다. And 하디 빌릭대 기다림. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it has been debated for a long period of time right now how middle powers can influence the geopolitics and the international system in the world, and the roles that they can play, especially constructively, in an era of great power politics. However, there is a long road ahead in addition to the political dialogue among these countries and a form of economic integration that they can at least form a venue for cooperation, then to establish a roadmap for the future geopolitics. It will, I think, need a lot of work and a lot of effort. And do we need to be optimistic about that? Maybe. Especially when three major powers in the international system are so much at kind of conflict with each other. Now, Professor Gino, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, the moderator. I'm very glad to have an opportunity to share my ideas here in Turkey in the name of the Security Forum in Istanbul. I'm very delighted. And as a Turkologist and as a Turkish expert in Korea, I know that today this session is about the balance of power and U.S.-Russia-China relations. But coming from the country, like my colleague have said, that the size of the middle country power, there are a lot of things that we can do together. And sometimes we've been asked by the great powers to choose the side. I mean, whether it is China or whether it is the United States, in our cases. And in Turkey cases in the East is about between U.S. and the West and perhaps Russia. But I'm not going to explain about the situation and so on, because I have my other colleagues who can debate about that issue. But rather, as coming from the Turkish expert, I would like to emphasize this perhaps a very similar thing, but the role of Turkey and Korea in the new era of our so-called geopolitics? Well, I'm a scholar raised in Turkey. Well, I am a product of Turkey because I did my MA and PhD here in Bilkent. And also my daughter is both here, and she's 19 years old at the moment. So yeah, so Turkey is a place that where all my things are, what I have at the moment, it belongs to this, what we call the heart of Anatolian in Ankara, actually. So I'm very, in this perspective, I would like to share some of my ideas how we can collaborate together in this changing world. So, yeah, so I would like to focus on the so-called the role of Turkey and Korea in so-called the middle power cooperation in U.S., Russia, China rivalry and competition. So I'm trying to emphasize the importance of middle powers and its regional political place generally in Eurasia, where the US and Russia and China rivalry and competition is at the global level. And I think that they are severely damaging an opportunity for the coming of stable and cooperative order in Eurasia. So in the aftermath of Ukrainian crisis, the region is standing a crossroad, the pressure to choose from either old family, Russia, or alternative, yeah. Historically, the region has been staged for a great power between external powers, namely Slav from the north and the West from the south. Henceforth, a new external influence of China in the name of Belt and Road Initiative is also active in the region. So South Korea and Turkey are situated in the far east corners of the Silk Road, respectively. And despite this separateness, the two states are drawn together with a cultural kinship and historical heritage. The two states possess a common ethnic root and share all the Altai customs and traditions. Then the Korean War made two people closer, we calling ourselves blood brothers, Kankardashins. Moreover, we are all members of G20 and the MIGTA, what my colleague have just mentioned. So the two states enjoys very close cooperation and interaction on the world stage. So I argue that Korea and Turkey can be an alternative power to this region, so-called Eurasia. So unlike the other major so-called imperialist, neo-imperialistic powers, the two middle power states are partners to the region. The two states have relatively less geostrategic interest, making them less aggressive and burdensome, bringing less anxiety to the Silk Road states. Thus, I would say that there should be a more international political space for these countries to play in international platform. Theoretically, we can talk about the middle power diplomacy and middle power cooperation in the context of Korea and Turkish cooperation in Eurasia. However, when we talk about this kind of a middle power diplomacy in the international arena, there are still many pros and cons regarding their capacity and their potential. Surely, they can have less potential and less capacity to solve the critical international issues. However, we should also acknowledge that there aren't enough of international platform to represent these powers to play due to the previous international orders dominated by the few great powers. So countries like Korea and Turkey can reconstruct the previous alliance and rivalry into a new cooperation mood by promoting the alternative platform. In other words, they can play as a balance of power in US, Russia, China rivalry and competition. Perhaps this is exactly what Turkey has been doing since Ukraine war. And the rivalry and stalemate situations are often mediated by Turkey throughout the crisis that we have been seeing throughout the last 2 years, actually. So as discussed above, many countries facing a humanitarian disaster seek a reciprocal partner, not a great power who tries to exploit them. Sometimes some countries with trouble lean on the great power to take that role. But it turned out that the involvement of great power was merely a new escalation of the problem, maybe far from providing more practical alternative for solution. So under these circumstances, countries like South Korea and Turkey could provide the alternative choice in this changing world. The greatest competitiveness of the South Korea and Turkey is that two states are middle power states. And middle power is not a great power, but still has influence and enough of international recognition and role. If such states have a strong willingness to provide practical and alternative solutions in the international crisis, they also have enough influence and power to deal multilaterally with global issues with a sufficient economic might and political base. So as a result, we may need a new international order and platform to host countries like Turkey, Korea, Japan, India, Brazil, Indonesia, and etc. So we have seen from many international crises that major superpower, such as Russia and China and US, and also 5 nations in the UN Security Council, could not give a solution nor provide the positive influence to the fate of the crisis. So, well, as everybody knows, as the President Erdogan has mentioned, the world is bigger than 5 countries. So, and these countries cannot cope with multidimensional and multicultural problems fairly and inclusively. So we can clearly see from the present and past experiences that current structure of international order and UN Security Council with the US, Russia, China rivalry couldn't give a fair solution from Ukraine crisis and even during at the Korean War. We all know that the Russia had vetoed during the Korean War in the role of UN. So it was just the US initiative who have lead the democracy war in the Korean War. So major powers remains a spectator rather than problem solver due to many political reasons. The world order of Second World War may well have called for us the UN Security Council to be structured that way due to the lack of states capable of taking on responsibility for global peace. But the global arena now is very, very different. There are vastly more independent states with many emerging economies, and the entire international political economy has been changed. Globalization have accelerated rapidly, and interdependence mean that the cost of the war have now increased exponentially. So in other words, the world order has changed so much that the criteria for responsible maintenance of peace calls for facelift in the UN Security Council and also international order as well. So at the era of US, Russia, China rivalry and competition, role of middle power such as Turkey and Korea can be seen as a very meaningful solution. The post-World War II period that still held on the remnant of colonialism has disappeared for good, and the new world order of interdependence is arising with middle powers. So in my opinion, a new system that is based on middle power, which includes developed and developing states that might eventually lead to perhaps G20 countries. The role of G20 middle power country perhaps can overcome the question of democratic equity amongst the members, but more importantly, to solve the need for future demands for reform over the old international order. This has also been starkly highlighted across the world with the sudden and rapid outbreak of COVID-19 and the Ukraine crisis, Syrian crisis, and etc. The virus and the wars and refugee issues have crippled the global economy and politics and caused states in every continent to reinforce strict isolationist policies, with several countries even closing down their borders. The recent crises have highlighted the need for modern cooperative global security network based on modern security threat, which might highlight the role of middle power. So, well, as the only Turkish department in Korea, this year we are celebrating about 50 years. Our department was established in 1973. And as you all know, it was last year that the OTS has been formed to have some multilateral platform in Eurasian area, so-called balancing the Shanghai cooperation and other multilateral platform. So I strongly urge a country like Korea or Japan being part of OTS and can play a very critical role in this changing world. It can give definitely an alternative voice. And as I have mentioned, we have a lot of common thing beyond so-called the rhetoric we call Kankardeş. I mean, we share a lot of values, cultures, language. I have my many students here. Right now, we are celebrating 50 years, and the Turkish expert in Korea is almost our graduate. Number is reaching 1,070. And most of them are very active here with many Korean companies in our institution. And they're very good with the Turkish culture and languages. And even recently, many Turkish young generations, they are very interested into so-called Korean pop cultures, and they are eagering to so-called to learn and so-called study in the Korea and East Asia. I think so-called the current regime, so-called the New Asian policy, which means Yeniden Asya politic, is very important in the sense that giving bit of view to eastward, where there can be more of opportunities. So, yeah, I think as an educator and expert on the Turkic issue in Korea, I think my huge mission is to increase the number of Koreans who know Turkish and Turkish culture, and not only in Turkish, but also in the Turkic world, where there are, we have a lot of common similarities. So, yes, we are talking about U.S., Russia, and China relation, so-called in the name of balance, but I think it's impossible. They keep asking us to choose which side you are in. And Korea is in dilemma because as a country who is divided country, which has a North Korea, we cannot totally ignore China too. So it's very, very much different. I've been talking with professor during my lunchtime. It's something like that, choosing between China and US is like, who do you like, your mother or father? It's very important for Korean destiny. So we have to be very, very rational. So in this case, we need something like similar power together, because otherwise our single voice is very small. But when we gather, I think we can make our more voice clear, and more something like the hegemonic politics coming from these three great powers, perhaps. Thank you very much for listening. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor O. And the next panelist is Professor Oktav.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank the Directorate of Communication, Fahrettin Altun Hoca, and his team for this wonderful organization. Chin, please don't trust either your father or mother. Only trust on yourself. Both are very dangerous. I would like to talk about the agreements very recently made between Saudi Arabia and Iran, just to explain what's going on in the international system and what kind of a role China is trying to adopt in the international system, particularly in the Middle East. Because as a scholar working on Iran for more than 20 years, this agreement is really a groundbreaking agreement, and more than the agreement. Why I would like to explain it. First of all, Saudi Arabia and Iran were really very much hostile to each other for long years. I won't go into detail of the reasons of this hostility between these two actors, but what happened, how China achieved to make make peace between themselves. First of all, this agreement and China's achievement is to a large extent due to the failure of United States in the region. Why United States failed? What do I mean by failure, U.S. failure? Actually, since the neocons coming to power in 2002, we are very much anxious about the American unipolarity, and we understood that America, no more inspiring country, a global power in the international system. We have to avoid the neocons and the Obama administration, most important of all, the Trump administration also made it clear, very clear to Turkey, that the United States is no more the United States. What do I mean by no more United States? I graduated from a U.S. college, Boğaziçi University. We used to get inspired from United States. We used to believe in the norms and values of the West. But looking closely, United States no more practicing its own norms and values in different parts of the world, specifically in the Middle East, violating human rights and giving support to terrorist organization, and no more a reliable partner and not playing a robust role in the NATO. And I can give you numerous examples. But first of all, Saudi Arabia, especially after Arab Spring, did not trust the United States at all, because United States Obama administration remained indifferent in the face of the fall of the Egyptian leader, for example, and the Gulf monarchies understood that it might be the turn of the Gulf monarchies, Gulf leaders, and the United States no more on the area, and the U.S. boots no more on the ground during the Arab Spring. And Turkey as well, in the similar vein, understood that United States would not cooperate with Turkey in coping with YPG, Kurdish, not Kurdish actually. This is a terrorist organization, not about the Kurds, but at the same time Daesh or ISIS, whatever you say. And Iran, was demonized by the neocons and isolated for many, many years by the United States. Now you see a lack of power. With what kind of a power? Hegemonic state stability. There is no a global power like United States whose priority is to stabilize. On the contrary, whose priority is to destabilize and to keep the Middle East under protracted war, because it is more advantageous to United States to keep the region under protracted wars, and this is less costly for United States. Especially after the invasion of Iraq, Washington did not want to have other wars costly, and especially during Obama period, we understood. Another important reason why Iran and Saudi Arabia came together. United States, first of all, and China, why China achieved to be an honest broker in bringing these two rivals together. And China is not, as you all know, is not a power or global player or actor whose priority is to interfere in domestic affairs, not judging the countries, Middle East countries, as they are. For example, not judging because Iran is violating human rights, freedom of speech, democracy, etc. And China is not, unlike United States, is not easing the fall of the governments democratically elected, as it happened in Egypt, for example, Hosni Mubarak. And China, unlike United States, does not aggressively interfere militarily in the territories of the country located in the Middle East. And for example, United States lost a lot of prestige because of the chaotic and destabilizing withdrawal from Iraq and Afghanistan. And this also led to the increase in prestige of China, because China avoided such chaotic roles. And another important reason why U.S. failed in Gulf, Saudi Arabia, for example, understood that United States would never help Saudi Arabia. For example, U.S. drone attack in 2019, Washington remained indifferent to this attack and did not help Saudi Arabia. And in Yemeni crisis as well, Trump openly stated that it would not rush another conflict to help Saudi Arabia. All these things made Riyadh understand that the United States would not help Saudi Arabia when it is in a danger. And the most important of all, as I mentioned, the United States turned out to be a global actor whose priority is not stability, on the contrary, whose priority is destabilization and protracted wars. And the United States actually its attention on Middle East was really very much distracted because of its own domestic problems. I just want to remind you the occupation of the Capitol Hill in 2020, and it also led to a great decline in U.S. prestige in the international system. Here I just want to explain my personal views about Trump administration. I believe we owe a lot to Trump himself, because he just showed us very clearly how United States is declining. Because I remember one columnist just explaining the situation like, he said that Trump showed us the furniture, and we used to think that the furniture is dusty, but the Trump just showed us the furniture without dust, but we saw that the furniture itself was already old. We used to think that the furniture was with dust, therefore it looks old, but in the reality, without dust, I mean, Trump just made us understand that the furniture itself was already old. All these reasons just make us understand that China enjoying the replacing United States. But there is a big question. Is China's capability is enough? I mean, is it enough to replace the gap of a global power in the Middle East as well as in the international system, in global system? My answer to this question is I'm not that much sure whether China is enough powerful to compensate for the lack of U.S. power in the international system. As many American analysts mentioned that this agreement, Saudi Arabia-Iranian agreement to start diplomatic relations, is very functional but not strategical. Why not strategic agreement? Because still we know that the U.S. military presence in the Gulf as well as in the Middle East to a large extent very big, and I won't go into details of the numbers of the bases, American bases in the region, but still Americans tries to close the gap in Saudi defense, for example. But what is the big advantage of this remarkable agreement for Saudi Arabia and Iran? Let me say a few words about it. For example, this agreement, 10th March agreement, Saudi Arabia and Iran agreement, just led to Saudis to make bargain with Israelis, because they thought that we have some conditions to make agreement with Israel, and because this agreement came after the Abraham Accords in 2020, you know, the normalization with Israel. This is a process started by Israel, and the normalization process started in 2020 by signing some agreements with Bahrain and United Arab Emirates. From that time onward, Iran was feeling very threatened, and Israel just gave the impression that it has an upper hand over Iran and over Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia did not sign any normalization agreement with Israel. But by signing agreements with Iran, Riyadh really achieved a lot in its negotiations with Israel, and because in Qatar, in United Arab Emirates, in Saudi Arabia, American military presence, we have to take into consideration this big American military presence, and American defense technology is still superior to that of China. And therefore, the answer to the question whether China is enough powerful to compensate for the lack of U.S. power in the Middle East is not. There is no clear answer to this question. But the 10th March agreement also, with this agreement, China also gained a lot, in my opinion. It just appeared a global player from it's expanding its regional footprint from economic exchange to negotiated conflict resolution. It just found the opportunity of showing itself as a soft power and diplomatically successful actor in the region, and in the equal distance to both Saudi Arabia and Iran. But yes, this is functional, but not strategic, maybe. The American analysts may be right. But on the other hand, China, Americans always pump the idea that China is very not soft power. During the Corona, for example, maybe you remember how China China's prestige declined because of the Corona, what we would call it, lockdown, yes. And so China found the opportunity of showing itself as a soft power and diplomatically successful power, and just having a big influence over Iran. And but there is another question: if Iran violates the requirements of the agreement, what kind of an attitude China would adopt? I'm not that much sure Iran will violate the requirements of the 10th March agreement, because owing to this agreement, Iran also gained a lot, just like Saudi Arabia. First of all, Iran was isolated, economically very much deprived and very much declined owing to Trump's administration. And Biden administration made a lot of mistakes towards Iran. For example, just continued the withdrawal from the Iranian nuclear agreement, and continued Trump's policy of isolating Iran. And therefore, the big contribution was made by United States, owing to the failures of the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Iran, diplomatically started their relations. And so another thing I would like to say about the...
If you can wrap it up, we can continue in question and answer.
It's good you reminded me, because we scholars speak a lot. And in the end, maybe I would like to say, finally, this agreement, 10th March agreement, is a very good example with respect to understanding the American failures in the Middle East and American people's weariness of their governments being policemen of the world, just led to the integration of the regional countries in the Middle East on regional level, and therefore Iran and Saudi Arabia's starting diplomatic relations under the brokership of China is a very good example. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much. And Professor Akıllı, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, esteemed colleagues, distinguished guests, I greet you all with respect. My name is Associate Professor Dr. Erman Akıllı, and I am working at Kırşehir Evran University. Before starting my presentation, I would like to express my gratitude to the Director of Communications, Professor Dr. Fahrettin Altun, and his esteemed team, and thank to their tireless efforts to make this well-organized and beautiful event. Today, I am going to speak about the digital diplomacy applications of China, US, and Russia. Is it possible to reflect the presentation, please? My speech is structured for four distinctive yet intertwined parts. First, I am going to give a brief information about what does digital diplomacy means and what are the advantages does digital diplomacy provides. And second part, I am going to give a brief information about what China, US, and Russian Federation is doing in the basis of digital diplomacy. And the third part, I will compare these countries' strengths and weaknesses in the basis of digital diplomacy. And the fourth part, I am going to give the information about the potentials and predictions about what the future of the digital diplomacy would be. Before starting to my presentation, I would like to share with you some statistics of this year that's prepared by the Global Data, the Digital Global Overview Report. According to the report, this year, 5.16 billion active internet users are present. And each year, there is 2% increase is predicted. And according to the report, average active internet users spends their 6 hours, 37 minutes in the internet each day. And when we look to the social media side, we see 4.76 billion people that actively using social media. And for each year, 3% annual growth is expected. And for an average person that is actively using social media, spending 2 hours and 31 minutes each day. I would like to share those statistics to you because it is essential to understand what does the digital diplomacy means, what does digital diplomacy means for the country, for the governments. I would like to quote Alexander Vance's famous article, what anarchy states makes of it. So I would like to say what digital diplomacy means and states makes of it. In a narrow meaning, digital diplomacy means governments that using digital technologies to achieve foreign policy goals. This is a narrow definition of digital diplomacy in a simple way. But if we open up the definition and they give a more broader understanding what does the digital diplomacy means, it means a government using digital platforms, social media, websites, video channels, mobile phone apps, and other relevant digital tools to pursue and promote constructive positive image, achieve foreign policy goals, set up the international community's agenda, and increase and enhance international cooperation. Also, I would like to mention about the advantages that digital diplomacy provides to a government. First and foremost, digital diplomacy tools, if a government can successfully wield the digital diplomacy, it would provide an increased reach for the message that disseminate from the government. As I mentioned, governments can utilize social media platforms. And at the beginning of my presentation, I have showed you that even this year, billions of people are active social media users. So taking this information to this saying, governments have the potential to reach out to the billions of people for disseminating their messages. It enables a more broader and more diverse foreign audience to disseminate the messages, comparing to the traditional diplomacy channels would provide. And secondly, it also provides a real-time communication for diplomats to the foreign audiences as well, especially in the essential times, which in the crisis times, which is the timely information and dissemination is so essential. And the other one is the increased transparency, since the diplomats can directly disseminate their messages, directly get in touch with their dedicated foreign audiences, it will have the capacity to build the trust between those two parties and also enhance the diplomatic communications transparency. And other aspect is cost efficient. As we all can guess that traditional diplomacy, if a government carries on a traditional diplomacy, for a diplomatic mission, there should be a physical establishment, a physical building. There should be staff spendings and other relevant spendings for keeping up that physical embassy or consulate. But comparing to the digital diplomacy, a government does not need that kind of physical presence at all. So in this comparison, we see that digital diplomacy provides a huge cost efficiency. And last but not least, all my esteemed colleagues mentioned about their speech heavily on the hard power perception of the situation. But digital diplomacy actually takes its roots from the soft power concept. Soft power concept is the umbrella concept for giving the roots and life for the digital diplomacy. And maybe if Mr. Kool also would agree, it also empowers the public diplomacy as well. So digital diplomacy provides a solid ground for countries to construct and explore, to export their positive images to the foreign audiences. Well, after this brief information, I would like to compare the practices of the countries. First, I will give the information and then I will compare. Well, when we look at the China's digital diplomacy practice, we see that China is heavily investing on the digital diplomacy. Not just the digital diplomacy, but the digital technologies as well. Likewise, 5G, artificial intelligence, big data, and other relevant technologies. This year, according to statistics, PRC invested more than $47 million for the digital technologies. So we can see that digital diplomacy is an important part for the China's foreign policy. So through digital diplomacy, China aims to promote its political, economic, and cultural interests, as well as shape the international public's opinion too. As I mentioned before, through the digital diplomacy, China is also willing to create, construct, and disseminate the Chinese soft power, the positive image towards the foreign audiences, and countering the Western narratives that are critical towards the China's policies and actions. China has also established various digital media outlets, such as China Global Television Network and Xinhua News Agency, to promote its narratives and perspectives on global events and issues. Country is also using social media platforms heavily to promote its culture and tourism industries as well as supporting the Belt and Road Initiative too, through the digital diplomacy. Also, China is providing digital assistance to the other countries, for instance, providing digital infrastructure towards the African countries. Now, I would like to explore and tell about the US digital diplomacy applications. After the China, US is the second heavy investor for the digital technologies. This year, US is invested more than 44 million US dollars, almost 45 million US dollars for digital diplomacy, for digital technologies to support their digital diplomacy practices. US is leveraging digital technologies to promote its interests and values abroad. Digital diplomacy of the US aims to support its foreign policy objectives, including promoting American values, democracy, human rights, economic prosperity, and countering disinformation and extremism. Other objectives US are aiming to achieve cooperation and strengthening its soft power in the foreign audiences as well. Another thing is, through digital diplomacy, US is willing to shape the international agenda on specific topics like climate change, cybersecurity, public health, etc. Also, United States is providing digital security training to the civil society organizations in the basis of the digital diplomacy, and also during the pandemic years, US provided digital tools to respond to the global crisis, such as COVID-19 pandemic, digital health information and resources to the affected countries as well. Of course, United States has an advantage comparing to the other countries, since many of the giant techs are stationed in the US. So it enables the US government to cooperate with them, for instance, with Google, like the old name Facebook, but the new name with the Meta, and other giant tech companies. US have the chance to cooperate and use the advanced technology in the digital diplomacy to achieving diplomacy goals as well. Now, for the Russian Federation digital diplomacy tools, the Russian Federation is also heavily related with the digitalization and digital diplomacy. But when we check the statistic, we cannot see that kind of money invested just like China and the US. But still, Russian Federation is heavily using digital diplomacy to promote the interests and counter the Western narratives that are critical its policies and actions, especially after the Ukraine war. Russia is heavily investing for the digital diplomacy, such as the cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and social media tools like WeContact, as countering the Meta in the Western side. Russia's digital diplomacy objectives include countering negative perceptions of Russia, including expanding its influence in the global arena. Also, this Ukraine-Russian war showed us that Russia is also utilizing the digital diplomacy as a defensive and offensive warfare tool in the war, as disseminating and countering disinformation. Also, Russian Federation established various digital media outlets like RT and Sputnik News to promote its views and challenge Western narratives. Now, I would like to make the comparison between those three countries. First, I would like to mention about their strengths. China is successful implementing digital diplomacy initiatives to promoting their economic and cultural interests. Using social media platforms such as Weibo and WeChat has enabled it to engage a large audience and create a positive image of China. When we look at the weakness of China's digital diplomacy, we see that it's mostly criticized for promoting propaganda and censorship. And countries' lack of transparency and trustworthiness has also been a challenge for its digital diplomacy. When we look at the US digital diplomacy strengths, it's successful for promoting American values and policies, especially in the areas of democracy and human rights. Have the chance to collaborate with the giant techs, and through that giant techs, like Google, like Meta, and other like Microsoft, have enabled it to leverage cutting-edge technologies to promote its digital diplomacy to the more larger audience. When we look at the weaknesses, US also criticized for promoting American exceptionalism in the foreign audiences and interfering in the domestic affairs of the other countries. Also, especially after the Second Gulf War, US credibility in the international community has also been a challenge for its for its digital diplomacy efforts. When we look for the Russia success in the digital diplomacy is countering negative perceptions of the country and promoting its cultural heritage and values. Country's use of social media platforms such as Twitter and Facebook has enabled it to engage with a large audience and challenge Western narratives. When we look at the weaknesses, it's criticized for disseminating and promoting propaganda and disinformation, as well as deepfakes. Also, countries' lack of trustworthiness and transparency also been a challenge for their digital diplomacy aims. For the conclusion of the comparison, each country's digital diplomacy efforts have unique strengths and weaknesses, reflecting their different foreign policy objectives and domestic contexts. While digital diplomacy offers new opportunities for countries to engage with international audiences and promote their interests, it also poses new challenges such as the spread of disinformation and propaganda. As the digital landscape still continues to evolve, it will be important for countries to adapt their digital diplomacy strategies to ensure that they remain adaptive and active. Now I would like to mention about the predictions. This diplomacy has the potential to transform the future of the international relations. Digital transformation process actually has been started way before the pandemic. But end of the 2019, world went into a transformation process, not just for the digitalization, but in the different means. So during the curfews, lockdowns, common people are more related with the internet technologies to carry on their daily business, daily lives, their education, their works, everything, their weekly purchases through the market. Even it has been a habit to making an online purchase. So this transformation also increased the usage of the digital technologies for governments as well. And in the near future, it seems that it will still gain a pace, and it will have the main value for the shaping for the next decade for the international system. So when we look at the digital diplomacy's uniqueness, we could mention that it provides to engage with the more broader and more diverse foreign audience. It bypasses the traditional diplomacy's limits. It also provides to construct and export a positive image. It is cost efficient. And most importantly, if countries can successfully wield the digital diplomacy, it can also enhance to receive their foreign policy goals. Yes, as I said so, but while digital diplomacy provides such promises, it also brings some new threats as well for the spread of the disinformation. Today, one of the some panelists mentioned about the malinformation instead of disinformation. It's also very open for the digital diplomacy to be a victim of the malinformation as well. So countries that are wielding digital diplomacy shall get together and put some standards for the implementing of the digital diplomacy. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much. And the organizers are reminding me that I have to wrap up at 5, so I have questions, but you have 2 minutes to answer. Let's see. So, the first question to Professor Jung. Tell us, there is this, we talk about the middle powers and how should they play a role in global geopolitics and try to make the global transformation much more predictable. But how about the role of the superpowers? So we know that Mike Tyson has this word. He says everybody has a plan until they are got punched on their face.
Yeah.
So middle powers has a plan, but how they going to stop the potential destructive effect of a superpower while they are trying to play a constructive role in the international system?
Okay, around 1990s, that was the time that Korean government initiated the so-called Northeast Asia mediate image of Korea as a way of, well, overcoming the constraints that we are facing. And as you pointed out, that when there are several superpowers surrounding Korean Peninsula, if we were located at the Latin American countries and African continent, maybe we can be regarded as a kind of regional hegemon with the current status of economy and the size of military expenditure. But unfortunately, we are regarded as a kind of a weaker country as we are surrounded by 4 big countries. But the answer is quite simple. Assume realistically, but solve the problem liberally. And so as the situation is quite negative, and it's not easy to overcome the constraints made by 4 superpowers, it does not mean that we should stop there and does not do anything. So we have to prepare by arguing that we are the driver of our destiny, and even though there can be a lot of difficulties and a lot of odds, we have to, all against the odds by endeavoring, all together. As Dr. O pointed out, by making a platform of middle powers, they can work together to defend against the possible pressure from the big countries.
How about you, Professor? The same question, because you also talk about middle powers and their potential cooperation.
Well, I think biggest lack that we are facing in this changing world is that, unfortunately, the so-called newly emerging powers don't have enough of space to participate and show their initiative in solving the international crisis and problems. So I think, of course, we cannot ignore the power of great powers. That's true. But I think, as I mentioned, the middle powers can have some alternative solution. Of course, I think we are admitting just the limitation of these powers, but 1 or 2 middle power can be weak. But when we gather with several middle powers together, that could be something that the great power cannot do, considering their images and their symbols in the international politics and so on. So, while like country like Korea and Turkey, who shares a lot of common things and common values and no any diplomatic so-called misunderstanding, can be a very good country. Well, we are talking about MICTA too, but MICTA is also very scattered middle power countries, everybody having their own problems. But
exactly.
But like Turkey and Korea, we are in the same continent, like Eurasia. So in this way we have more commonness. So I would say that like OTS can be another platform where we can cooperate together. And I think recent initiative of the Erdogan's administration about OTS and supporting of the Turkic states about OTS is, I think, beginning. We can consider how the European Union have come today. It's come from the EEC to EC to EU. So it's by step. I mean,
ECSC,
yeah.
European Coal and Steel Community.
Let me just one thing. We have to think of how the G20 was born. If the G7 were enough to solve the problems, they don't need to create G20. That proves that collaboration among middle powers can solve the problems altogether, and we can collaborate under solidarity. And so that's why I emphasize the solidarity based on universal values that we share. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Professor Oktav, your assumption was based on the decline of the United States. But haven't been a lot of time that we are talking about American decline. For those who would remember those days, it started with Sputnik, then Vietnam War, then Watergate, then the end of the Cold War because there is no enemy anymore, then Iraq War, then 2008 financial crisis, then even Trump, then pandemic. It has been a while. Maybe this process, the decline will continue. Maybe we are exaggerating the potential impacts of US decline. Are we?
the examples you gave us are from the Cold War period, and during the Cold War period, there was another global power balancing the power of the United States. And the United States was not in obligation to spend much money to be only one global power. Unipolarity costed the United States very high. I mean, they spent much money to sustain, to keep their one global power in the international system. They called, after Iraqi invasion, the United States could not afford to be only one global power. It became very costly to United States, and they therefore called this period American moment. I mean, in 2005, American moment, American being only global power, came to an end because United States needed another global power balancing its own power. Otherwise, Washington would spend a lot of money, and it was very costly, and they just made, for example, a metaphor was made by United States. Just think of a pastry. If you spread the pastry, it be getting thinner and thinner and thinner, and so Obama administration just decided not to spread all over the world, they decided to stop being the only global power, only policeman of the universe on international system. Otherwise, their power would get thinner and thinner. Therefore, they did not want to have. I just mentioned that there was no more U.S. boots on the ground in Syria, for example. It is very costly because. And so they needed another player just to share the burden of being a policeman of the international system. But I have a question to the colleagues of mine from Korea.
After the next
Sorry,
question,
but I wonder very much.
will.
What would be the gluing factor among the middle powers? I mean, there must be a gluing a factor having the gluing effect between the middle powers. For example, Saudi Arabia and Iran, why they came together? Because both suffered from the United States. The only factor having the gluing effect between Saudi Arabia and Iran was the hostility towards the United States.
I will give the word for Professor Akıllı and then come there. But it will generate a lot of discussion if you say Iran and Saudi Arabia is glued right now. So it is a whole other debate. So Professor Akıllı,
yes,
tell us the future of the war in technology. Because most of the experts are saying that the new generation conflict between the superpowers will be on technology, whether it is quantum computing, artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, anything, machine learning. So tell us how you see this conflict to take place in the next 2 decades.
Well, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Actually, during my presentation, I mostly emphasized on the positive things. For the good part, but the thing is, yes, this is the reality. Technology is a two-sided blade. One side for sharing and exporting the positive image, but the other side, if it's used on the basis for the armed weapon for the other countries, it could cause other unforeseen conflicts between the states. I would like to give an example from the Russia and Ukraine war, as we had all witnessed during those last more than 1 year actually, for last 14 months. Both sides are accused each other that there has been cyber attacks to the various institutions' websites from the vice versa hackers. So we have seen that this will not stop just by the example of Russia and Ukraine. For the further years to come, we will see it for the international system that those kind of conflicts will occur. And since, as I mentioned, countries are heavily investing millions of dollars they are investing for the digital technologies. It is not just for the science cases, as we can all imagine, but also there are like sideways for wielding the digital power to conducting the national security and to achieving and strengthening the foreign policy goals and the basis of the national interests. So future is open for the, unfortunately, I would like to say, I didn't want to say, but this is the reality. Future is open for the digital conflicts to yet the years to come.
Thank you. And I will give 1 minute to answer Professor Oktav's question, what can be the glue?
Glue points, culture. So finding cultural contact, and we believe the power of culture. And the godfather of our independence, Baekbang Gingu, once mentioned that I don't want my country to be powerful as a military power. I want my country to be culturally powerful that can connect the world with the power of culture.
Let me say a few words. I was in Japan, and I noticed that the Japanese young people are like American young people. There is an American cultural hegemony, although I say that they are in decline, but American culture still dominates in your country as well, in South Korea and Japan, in Turkey. This is my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know.
He would respond with BTS. Squid Game, Parasite, Psy. There are so many things.
Well,
Okay,
I'm not talking
I'm
about the
finishing.
preponderance of culture. By finding out the similar cultural contact points and sharing the culture, we can understand each other. And understanding will be the power.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for the panelists. And we are ending our session today here. The session, one-on-one session, is taking place downstairs in the main hall. Thank you for your participation, and let's congratulate the panelists together.